Over the recent past, the Palestinian suffering and cause is seeing more global awareness and sympathy at levels unseen before. Israel is being called out, not by the typical nations that have done so for almost 8 decades, mainly Arab or Muslim countries, but by nations that represented a single and unified Western bloc, nations that would always have Israel's back. Trust in Israeli leadership is no longer taken for granted.
That's why, despite all the lies you've heard, the war in Gaza has one of the lowest ratios of combatants to non-combatants casualties in the history of urban warfare.
The Zionist narrative is being fact-checked, revealed as falsified. There are, of course, the typical exceptions: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. These nations have supported and armed Zionist violence throughout Israeli history, and who continue to do so without any hesitation or real possibility for change. The reality, though, within these complicit nations is that the majority of their populations actually oppose their governmental positions and policies, and thus contradict their nation's support of Zionist behavior. So for these nations as well, one can appreciate how the majority of citizens align with the morality and just cause intrinsic within the Palestinian plight. And so we can assume that the majority of populations across the world have unity of conviction that the Zionist elite and political class, be it in Israel or within these 4 Western nations, are the only groups who support ethnic cleansing, collective punishment, and genocide, and not their individual populations, right? Wrong. Israel's population cannot claim this clear conscience. On the contrary, the mindset today is that Palestinians and those who oppose Zionist endeavors deserve what they're going through, that more should be done to wipe them out. This is the new collective morality that is on the rise in Israel. No longer is this fringe politics. It's flowing freely into the mainstream. Since the first ascent of Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, we started to see the first inklings of ultra-Zionist speech, conviction, strategy, and unaccountable action. The harshness and hardness of violence on Palestinians that ensued through his leadership was a more extreme experience, something new the world had to contend with. Today, it's not only Netanyahu, his individual political allies, or his supporters, but a new cross-section of Israeli society that has jumped the moral chasm: the ultra-Orthodox politicians, represented by such characters as Gvir and Smotrich, as well as their expansive constituents, who are now assimilated within this new larger ultra-Zionist group. And this group wants blood, with no care or accountability. So now gone is this regurgitated Western excuse that whatever immorality Israel was spreading was restricted to a small cross-section of society, a political leadership and elite that would ebb and flow with elections. This was not representative of the larger Israeli population. Well, sorry, that's simply not the case anymore. Such a mindset is now afflicting a large and growing portion of the Israeli people. We don't need to fabricate or make anything up. Facts and figures through surveys over the last 25 years exhibit exactly this shift in Israel's general population mindset. Let's look at local Israeli surveys that have addressed several of the key points that have represented the Israeli-Palestinian case, and they are the two-state solution potential, ethnic cleansing strategy in the occupied territories, and the humanitarian aid in Gaza. I want to caveat one point here. Keep in mind that when examining Israeli survey figures, there exists within the Israeli population composition a 20% minority of Arab Israelis. They typically represent more non-military interventionists, as well as a negotiation-first and friendly contingent. When we examine the two-state solution angle, we can see that in 2012, the support by Israelis stood at approximately 61%. Several years later, after repetitive Israeli military incursions into Gaza and the West Bank, this figure dropped to 47%. By the beginning of 2020, the support for the two-state solution framework dropped to 33%. Something shifted in Israeli society that caused a major drop by 2020. In late 2023, post-October, the support level dropped, but only by 4% to 29%. Strange, no? You'd think after Hamas's attack, the figure would plummet. But Israeli decision on a two-state solution had already been made long before that attack. As of 2025, the figure stands at 21%, pretty much on par with the peaceful solution-hungry Arab Israelis ratio of the population.
I say this not only in my name or the name of my government, but on behalf of all the people of Israel. Last year, there was a vote in the Knesset, our parliament, whether or not to oppose the imposition of a Palestinian state. You want to guess what the results were? Out of 120 members of our parliament, 99 voted against and only 9 supported. That's over 90%. It's not a fringe group. It's not the prime minister who himself is extreme or he's held hostage by extreme parties to his right. It's over 90% of Israelis. My opposition to a Palestinian state is not simply my policies or my government's policy. It's the policy of the state and people of the state of Israel.
When we look at the ethnic cleansing aspect, the annexation of Gaza in this case, we see how in 2023, right after Hamas's attack, 33% of Israelis were in favor of annexing Gaza and expelling the Palestinians into other Arab lands. By the end of 2024, this figure rose to 50%. By 2025, the figure spiked again to reach 67%. On humanitarian aid into Gaza, the story is pretty much the same. By the beginning of 2024, still suffering from the shock of Hamas's attack, 68% of Israelis opposed any humanitarian aid. By the end of 2024, this number dropped to 53%. But as the violence escalated and famine became a foreseeable reality, one would think that hearts would warm and aid would be supported by fellow human beings. But no, by the middle of 2025, 65% of Israelis were unconcerned about the Palestinians' plight. And by August 2025, the survey figure for Israelis against any humanitarian aid would hit 79%. Again, reflecting a totally inhumane recklessness by Israelis who were not of Arab origin. Now, why would any society, Israeli or not, who claim to be representative of democratic values, heightened morality, more chosen for that matter than any other humans on earth to best represent the inherent qualities of humanity, have such barbaric convictions? There are a combination of factors that contribute to the development of this mindset. One culprit of this extremist shift is, of course, the typical Zionist political discourse that keeps drawing upon the memories of Jewish vulnerability and, of course, the Holocaust. Israeli society has thus, over the decades, developed an ethos of conflict, a framework that continually reinforces narratives of victimhood, existential threat, and moral righteousness. Within such an ethos, reminders of past persecution do not remain distant historical reflections. They become active psychological lenses through which present dangers are interpreted. And when this perception embeds itself within the mainstream national soul, several psychological consequences follow.
And I would like to use the rest of my time to say how appalled I am that people are bringing up the Holocaust. Do not use other genocides to describe this one. I have been...
First, complex political realities are reframed as survival struggles. Second, moral boundaries become self-serving. The in-group, the ultra-Zionist coalition and its constituents is cast as light, democratic, humane. Adversaries, Palestinians and Arabs, are dehumanized in language that emphasizes hostility, irrationality, or inherent aggression. And this trauma, this dynamic, then intersects ideally with Holocaust memory and regional hostility. At the same time, media ecosystems, or Hasbara in the Zionist case, not the international kind, but the local overwhelming flavor, can persuade wavering convictions or amplify existing ones.
אין רעב בעזה. נכנסו לעזה, תקשיבי לי טוב, מיליוני טונות של סיוע הומניטרי.
על כך שישראל מרעיבה את העזתים, חייב להגיד לך מהתמונות שאני רואה, אני חושב שצריכים קצת לרדת במשקל,
Social psychology shows that repeated exposure to dehumanizing language increases acceptance of harsher measures against perceived enemies. In such an environment, anger can fuse with grief, and grief with a desire for decisive retribution. And thus, Israelis are further conditioned towards immoral tenets. This is all clear and known. I've not said much that's new, but it's a necessary summation to understand the baseline. A baseline that involves a large section of Israeli society that is blind to universal human morality and open to a further descent into darkness, into anger, into affliction.
People think that the children and the men and the women in Gaza, they're innocent. Bullshit.
I really do appreciate you taking the time and watching the Kennedy Chronicles. Please do join our community by subscribing so that you don't miss out on any content regarding the Arab and Muslim history, identity, and modern condition. And if you really do enjoy the channel week in and week out and would like to support us even further, please do join us at our YouTube membership program as well as on Patreon. Thanks again. If baseline isn't enough in tipping the scales towards more impunity from Zionists, then demographics are playing a key role in the shift of ideological makeup of Israel as a state. The reality not being highlighted is that Israeli population is recalibrating itself. And so the collective impressions on morality, justice, and freedoms, basic elements of humanity, are on the move, in the balance, tipping heavily towards the belief that inhumane aggression, active humiliation of the Palestinians, and a general impunity of immoral behavior in the region as the only way forward for Israel. There are two elements that come into play here. The first is the imbalance of population growth in Israel. Fertility rates amongst religious nationalist communities such as the Haredi community is significantly higher than secular or non-ultra-religious groups, a 3-to-1 ratio, meaning in a decade, ultra-Orthodox Zionist citizens will make up almost 25% of Israel's entire population. That's up from 14% in early 2025. Let me explain how that impacts the demographic makeup of ideologies. The Haredi community are aligned with the Promised Land myth. They prioritize Jewish sovereignty over everything else, even democracy and international law. They are hawks when it comes to settlement expansion and the reclamation of Gaza in totality. So this presents a scenario when the Israeli society will harden further, become more extreme, and eventually shape a political force that wants no peace and no Palestinian presence. And the second element greatly impacting the balance of Israel's population is Yerida, a reality we rarely hear of. You've heard of Aliyah before, right? The immigration of Jewish diaspora towards the Promised Land, right? Well, Yerida is its opposite. It's when Israeli Jews emigrate out of Israel to other nations for good. One would think that Yerida is not really a thing, or at most insignificant. That as per the Zionist narrative, all Jews, and especially Israeli Jews, have a strong bond to their country. In the past, these emigration figures were minuscule, but since the Netanyahu-Smotrich-Ben Gvir alliance, the numbers have skyrocketed. As per the Israeli daily newspaper Calculist, in 2022, the figure was 15,900 Israeli Jews relocating to the United States or Europe. In 2023, this number jumped up to 28,600. By 2024, the number doubled to approximately 56,800. And in 2025, the latest figures show a potentially even higher figure, reaching almost 80,000 immigrants. 2026 is expected to carry a similar negative flow of Jews out of Israel. Beyond the quantitative analysis, and what is more critical is the qualitative one. Those leaving Israel are those who are highly educated, secular, or non-extremist, economically mobile. This could mean that Israel could have lost in excess of 20 to 25% of its highest human capital in terms of knowledge, experience, and economic engine, meaning that who remains of this group are being diluted by larger and growing swaths of an Israeli population that believes in the ultra-Zionist modus operandi. Taking into consideration the elements of facts, psychological conditioning, and demographic changes, the biggest concern is not the reality today. The significant disaster is trend. The entire world is aligning with what is considered a shared universal humanity on the Palestinian issue, a consistency of what good and evil are, of morality and immorality, of fact versus fiction. The noticeable trend, though, presents a different question for Israel, that this is going to get worse, that there is an imminent, continuous descent of the Israeli population into deeper iniquity. It is plausible that the level of Israel's ultra-Zionist affinity could reach the 70, 80, or 90 percentiles. What happens then? This makes me wonder a little. Are we, as observers, able to track the moral decline of a nation within a short period of time, let's say 5 years? Witness how its people change in their beliefs, in their values, in their humanity. It's happened before. Many times in Asia and the States, and most noticeably in Europe, a perceptible shift of moral compass where civility was replaced with warmongering and depravity, when victimhood was substituted with genocidal tendencies. And the unbelievable yet undeniable fact is that there is only one nation who can claim that within a single lifetime, it has experienced the consequences of immorality and injustice at the hands of other nations, while at the same time made victims of others as a consequence of their own.